Hello and welcome back. A teacher from the local primary school gave me a few of these branches, and what she asked is if I could cut them up into slices, a little bit like this one here, which I did on my drop saw. I'm going to use the bandsaw to cut this branch and the other ones that she gave me, and that will allow me to get all the way along the full length of the branch here. So let's give that a go. Well, that was a little bit scary. And the reason why is because this branch rocks around quite a lot here on the table. So it's not that stable. And if I were to cut some slices off, the blade could catch in the front and start rolling the branch. And it could drag my fingers into the blade, which would not be very good. So what I've got to do is make this a bit more stable to stop it from rocking so that I can cut the slices off safely. I did some searching on YouTube and Google in regards to cutting round tree branches on the bandsaw, and it looks like the most common method is to use a sled. I've found this piece of 19mm plywood, and this will be ideal to make a sled. There were a few different methods of holding the round tree branch in the sled. One was to make a V out of 2 bits of wood, and then the tree branch would fit in the sled and you could hold that down. Another method was to use a solid stop at the end of the sled here, and then you could clamp down your tree branch with a clamp, and that would hold it nice and secure. I'm going to use this method here, and this is a piece of 4x2, or in America you call it a 2x4. Obviously it's too short, so I'm going to cut a longer bit from this long piece here. The sled typically has a runner which is bolted to the bottom of it, and that runs in the groove on your table. In a lot of cases that's made from some hard timber, the correct size, but I don't have any, so I'm going to use a piece of this 7mm steel flat bar, and that's the perfect height for this application. I just need to cut it to length and then cut and mill down to the right width to fit into the miter slot on the table. I'll just mark out where I need to cut the flat bar. Then it's over to the vise with a cut-off wheel to get it to the right length. I also need to cut down the length of this piece so that it's slightly wider than the miter slot. Then we're over to the mill, and that is milled down to the right width. I tested out in the slot of the table and that works really well. I'm just marking the top and the front because I want it in that orientation. I mark out where the guide needs to be bolted to the sled. I make sure it is all parallel, then it's clamped in place, and I center punch for the bolt holes. Those holes are drilled out and tapped to M8. I make sure that the screws fit in the holes with no issues. Now I countersink the top of the hole so that the bolt can be lower than the surface. The guide is then bolted on, and then the piece is tested in the miter slot. And it works beautifully. The next step is to make the solid part at the back here. So again, I mark out where I need to cut the piece of wood. Then I cut that off over on the bandsaw. I'm going to nail and screw these pieces together, so I give both pieces of wood a good sanding. Then the pieces are held in place and I use some brad nails to hold it together. Then drill some holes and screw in some screws. To stop the steel bar from rusting, we need to treat it. This is perma-blue, which will blue the steel, or it'll make it go black. And that gives it a coating to minimize any rust and corrosion. Now I also have some bolts here for another job that I'm doing, so I'm going to blue them all at the same time. This is at normal speed, and this is how fast the reaction happens. So I swirl those round and those bolts are black pretty much within seconds. I'll put the piece of steel in, give it a little brush at the bottom there, and that's how quick it turns black. I basically fast forward the rest of this. Once the items have been blackened, they are put in the water to neutralize the reaction from the chemical. Then they're thoroughly dried off with the air gun and oiled up for some protection. That is the finished piece, and you may remember I had top and front on here, which I don't have on there now, but I did mark it here, which corresponds with a mark in the wood, so I know it goes on that way there. Now this was a bit of an amateur screw up. I nailed the wooden piece on and the bolt hole was kind of in the way here, but I'm able to get the bolt in on a bit of an angle and then I can straighten it up. The steel bar is bolted onto the back, and then we go off and test it on the bandsaw. The first cut here is just truing up the end from the chainsaw. Then I loosen the clamp, slide it across the distance that I want, clamp it up again and cut the piece off. Well, this jig worked really well. I made all of these pieces here, so the school will be very happy with that, and I'll take them down to the school in the next few days. As mentioned, I used steel on the back here. You don't need to do that. If you've got some hard wood that you can make to the right width and height, then that will work just as well. I hope everyone has a great day, and once again, thanks for watching.